At a time we are dealing with numerous challenges in our nation, from the killings of young persons to the economic turmoil that we are facing, to numerous and various problems that the nation Kenya faces, I am here to give you unfiltered insight into these issues, one by one, as we delve into the details of these occurrences. My name is Chris Kushu, and this is my unfiltered insight. You wonder how a country like Kenya, with all its resources, with all its labor market, and with the skills and the level of learning and learned persons and professionals that it produces, and the literacy levels in this country, you wonder why we are still in the developing nation category. With the resources we have as a country, with the climate we have as a country, you wonder why and you wonder how. And the levels of corruption that thrive in this country, we keep asking ourselves how it thrives so much. This is how the Kenyan political class manages to suppress the development of the nation to their benefit and channel the resources that are supposed to be used for development and growing this country to their own pockets and to benefit themselves. They know if they steal outrightly, they will be caught. If they will be caught and there's a system that comes after them, their properties, their money will be seized and returned to the government. So as a Kenyan politician, what do you do when you know there are agencies put there by the Constitution that can come after you, that have been empowered by the Constitution to come after you if you steal public money? When the Constitution was formulated, the drafters of the Constitution 2010 Kenya saw it fit to come up with a whole chapter dedicated to ethics of leaders in this nation. That was meant to ensure that people who are corrupt and people of questionable character never get to power in this nation, so that the country could move forward. That was the flowery chapter 6 of the Constitution. But this was a threat to the political class that was existent then and that is existent now. And since Parliament is the house with the most responsibility in that constitution and to come up with supporting laws and legislations that were not directly formulated by the Constitution and meant to strengthen the implementation of that chapter, they hatched a plan to ensure that they suppressed chapter 6 of the Constitution. Yes, it says this. Yes, it says this. Yes, it says this. They began with the election laws of the country. Parliament tampered and watered down those laws that it could allow any hooligan in the political arena to run for member of parliament. And as long as the parties that were run and governed by the very rotten people who were in the previous administrations and the previous political settings that had drained this country dry, those parties could put forward people who are loyal to them. They could find all the hooligans and the ones who had dropped the coffers dry and put them in power because they would become their puppets. This was to infiltrate Parliament because it's the most powerful entity and arm of government in the Constitution today and the most consequential one. They ensured that it was infiltrated by their loyalists. Then they began the mission of suppression by passing laws that ensured that those institutions that are responsible to clean up the political arena and the governance arena of this republic were weakened. The EACC, the institution responsible for corruption, dealing with the persons who are corrupt in this nation, the institution responsible for investigating corrupt practices in this country, was weakened and had no teeth and had no power. And they ensured that the persons that they appointed to the EACC and the persons who work at the EACC are also rotten to the core. In that, their effectiveness in going after the persons who steal public money is almost nil. Because if you compare the rate at which convictions are secured by EACC against the rate at which Kenya is losing and hemorrhaging public funds, it is a drop in the ocean. It is a negligible amount of convictions compared to the over 3 billion shillings we are losing every day to corruption. It is negligible to the effects that we are feeling about corruption in this country. Because how do you explain to me that you have earned convictions and recovery of assets of, say, 45 billion, while the country is losing 645 billion shillings every year? If the EACC had the teeth to go after the corrupt in this country and the real powers and political goodwill to operate in this country, 90% of the political class today would be in jail and their properties seized and their money seized, because 90% of them are corrupt to the core. But is that the case? No, it isn't, because they have suppressed the powers of the EACC. The entity responsible for prosecutions, the Office of the Director of Political Prosecutions, has been politicized. The DPP appointments are purely political. Instead of picking the professionals who have been in that department for years, who can execute prosecutions better. And they ensure that the DPP is under their control. From there, we go to the DCI, which has a whole crime unit to investigate these corrupt practices. But what happens? It also gets political appointments. The Inspector General of Police office is a political office. Yet, even if politically appointed, it should be given to an individual who's competent. You see, when the likes of Lee Kuan Yew, who was the very first Prime Minister of Singapore, to deal with corruption in Singapore in order for Singapore to prosper, he did not form another institution to fight corruption. He turned to the already existent Corrupt Practices Bureau and strengthened it. Passed laws that gave it power. Passed laws that gave it strength. Passed laws that ensured it had the best prosecutors, the best investigators in matters corruption. Gave it unfettered access to government records, to audit reports, and ensured it was well staffed and that it could go after any politician, even he himself as a prime minister, and ensured that institution had goodwill. And in at least 5 to 10 years, the corruption levels in Singapore were very negligible. And in a single soap, with an already existent institution, they had swept Singapore clean of corruption. We don't need another institution. We need to strengthen EACC. And if you want to know that Parliament suppresses the powers of the EACC to go after the corrupt, when it comes to political cases in matters of elections, they have already passed a law that ensures those cases are decided within 6 months. Why does a corruption case that has hemorrhaged even 40-50 billion shillings of Kenyan taxpayers' money take 10 years? Take 5 years, take 7 years to decide, while a political case of an election of a member of parliament takes 6 months? How are we able to decide a presidential election petition in 14 days? 14 days with all the evidence that comes with it, and we are not able to determine a corruption case within 3 months, within 6 months? How then do you explain to me that EACC is strengthened by the laws that Parliament passes? You see, they play a game of suppression. When the president takes power, he ensures that he buys MPs, puts them in his pocket, and they sing his song. So that whatever laws he wants to pass, it is passed by this choir singers in parliament with no question. Parliament, if not suppressed by the executive, parliament, if not taken over by political party loyalists, is a very effective oversight tools, because parliament committees have the powers of the high courts. Then combine that with an effectively working DCI, combine that with an effectively working EACC, combine that with an effectively working Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, you will have a seamless system that can reduce corruption within 5 years in this country, that can recover billions in shillings that has been stolen in this nation. I mean, it only needs a month or two for Parliament to pass a law to ensure that EACC is well-staffed, has the right professionals, has the right persons in those high offices, and has the power to go after corrupt individuals. It takes a very short period of time for Parliament to pass laws to ensure that the DPP, the EACC, the DCI, and all investigative agencies and prosecution agencies of this republic work together to ensure that corruption is eliminated. But the game of suppression that they play cannot allow them to ensure these institutions work. They weaken those institutions deliberately, pass laws that make it very difficult for those institutions to flourish and execute their mandate. I mean, even when you come to county governments, when a governor wants to proliferate the funds of a particular county government, he will either intimidate the county assembly, or the easier route of bribing them works better, so that they overlook the ills of that governor. County assemblies, if correctly used, if with the right leadership in power, can check on the excesses of the county government. They even have a very effective tool, which they, by the way, use when politics is at play, and to their own benefit and to the detriment of the sitting governor, the impeachment tool. Parliament has the same powers. If the executive is corrupt, they can impeach. If any head of any institution is corrupt, they can impeach. And when it comes to independent constitutional offices, they can, after the investigations in their committees, they can recommend to the president to form a committee to investigate the conduct of those, because the Constitution has provided for those avenues. But how they succeed in looting our country and destroying the governance of this nation is by suppressing the very institutions that can ensure that this country moves forward and lifts the lead on corruption cases and ensures that it is solved and ensures that the governance issues we have disappear for once and for all. And then Kenya will work seamlessly. And I assure you, within a generation, that is between 25 to 30 years, Kenya can become the African Singapore seamlessly. Because when you don't suppress the institutions that are supposed to provide the necessary checks and balances, projects like Garalana Kulalu would have been a success. Over 5 years ago, Kenya would be food secure today. Kenya does not need to import any food. But that is a mirage. Irrigation in the Rift region, where the Aurora and Kimore dams were supposed to be constructed, would have lifted the food security prospects of this nation if the institutions in this country that are supposed to provide the checks and balances were not suppressed. But through suppression, our politicians and the so-called leaders have ensured that the country does not work correctly and that they are never held accountable. And that is how the nation, Kenya, has deteriorated to being one of the most corrupt nations, which ensures that our development is very, very slow. and at some point ineffective. If the proper checks and balances were working and not suppressed, hospitals will run seamlessly. Medication will be available. People will be employed on merit and not knowing who and whom. CSs will be appointed on merit and retained on performance. But the politicians of this country cannot allow that. And they keep suppressing our institutions. And the only way is to ensure the people we elect into power in the next election cycle are persons who do their job to ensure that the institutions supposed to provide the checks and balances in this nation are working correctly, are armed with the right laws and the right powers. And then, and only then, can we solve the problems that bedevil this nation. That is my unfiltered insight.